Section 8 of All About Coffee. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. All About Coffee by William Ukers. The Introduction of Coffee into Holland. How the enterprising Dutch traders captured the first world's market for coffee, activities of the Netherlands East India Company, the first coffee house at The Hague, the first public auction at Amsterdam in 1711 when Java coffee brought 47 cents a pound green. The Dutch had early knowledge of coffee because of their dealings with the Orient and with the Venetians, and of their nearness to Germany, where Rauwolf first wrote about it in 1582. They were familiar with Alpini's writings on the subject in 1592. Paludanus, in his coffee note on Linschotten's travels, finished further enlightenment in 1598. The Dutch were always great merchants and shrewd traders. Being of a practical turn of mind, they conceived an ambition to grow coffee in their colonial possessions so as to make their home markets headquarters for a world's trade in the product. In considering modern coffee trading, the Netherlands East India Company may be said to be the pioneer, as it established in Java one of the first experimental gardens for coffee cultivation. The Netherlands East India Company was formed in 1602. As early as 1614, Dutch traders visited Aden to examine into the possibilities of coffee and coffee trading. In 1616, Pieter van der Broek brought the first coffee from Mocha to Holland. In 1640, a Dutch merchantman named Werfbeen offered for sale in Amsterdam the first commercial shipment of coffee from Mocha. As indicating the enterprise of the Dutch, note that this was 4 years before the beverage was introduced into France, and only 3 years after Canopius had privately instituted the breakfast coffee cup at Oxford. About 1650, Warna, the Dutch minister resident at the Ottoman Porte, published a treatise on coffee. When the Dutch at last drove the Portuguese out of Ceylon in 1658, they began the cultivation of coffee there, although the plant had been introduced into the island by the Arabs prior to the Portuguese invasion in 1505. However, it was not until 1690 that the more systematic cultivation of the coffee plant by the Dutch was undertaken in Ceylon. Regular imports of coffee from Mocha to Amsterdam began in 1663. Later, supplies began to arrive from the Malabar coast. Pascal Rosé, who introduced the coffee house into London in 1652, is said to have made coffee popular as a beverage in Holland by selling it there publicly in 1664. The first coffee house was opened in Kottenvoorhat in The Hague under the protection of the Writer van Essen. Others soon followed in Amsterdam and Haarlem. At the instigation of Nicolaas Witsen, Burgomaster of Amsterdam and Governor of the East India Company, Adrian van Ommen, commander of Malabar, sent the first Arabian coffee seedlings to Java in 1696, recorded in the chapter on the history of coffee propagation. These were destroyed by flood, but were followed in 1699 by a second shipment, from which developed the coffee trade of the Netherlands East Indies that made Java coffee a household word in every civilized country. A trial shipment of the coffee grown near Batavia was received at Amsterdam in 1706, also a plant for the botanical gardens. This plant subsequently became the progenitor of most of the coffees in West Indies and America. The first Java coffee for the trade was received at Amsterdam in 1711. The shipment consisted of 894 pounds from the Jakarta plantations and from the interior of the island. At the first public auction, this coffee brought 23 2/3 suivers, about 47 cents, per Amsterdam pound. The Netherlands East India Company contracted with the regents of Netherlands India for the compulsory delivery of coffee, and the natives were enjoined to cultivate coffee, the production thus becoming a forced industry worked by government. A general system of cultivation was introduced into Java in 1832 by the government, which decreed the employment of forced labour for different products. Coffee growing was the only forced industry that existed before this system of cultivation, and it was only the government cultivation that survived the abolition of the system in 1905 to 08. The last direct government interest in coffee was closed out in 1918. From 1870 to 1874, the government plantations yielded an average of 844,854 piculs a year, a picul being a weight from 133 to 140 pounds. From 1875 to 1878, the average was 866,674 piculs. Between 1879 and 1883, it rose to 987,682 piculs. From 1884 to 1888, the average annual yield was only 629,942 piculs. Holland readily adopted the coffee house, and among the earliest coffee pictures preserved to us is one depicting a scene in a Dutch coffee house of the 17th century, the work of Adriaan van Ostade, 1610 to 1675. History records no intolerance of coffee in Holland. The Dutch attitude was ever that of the constructionist. Dutch inventors and artisans gave us many new designs in coffee mortars, coffee roasters, and coffee serving pots. End of section 8. Read by Ware Tortoise in Manchester, UK, 3rd of February 2022.